Well, JR, it's good to be with you for this fireside chat. We've got all of 15 minutes to cover what I think is a 15-hour topic. So I could go all day and talk about FinOps, the convergence of ITAM and everything, but let me just kick it off to you with Flexera has been talking for many years about what we see as a convergence or the need for more collaboration between traditional FinOps, which has been affiliated with cloud, and ITAM, which has been affiliated with desktop and data center. Obviously, the analysts have caught up to this way of thinking, and I know that FinOps has really embraced, the FinOps Foundation and the associated framework has embraced this. How did we get here, and how are you thinking about it nowadays?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head with the convergence of categories is kind of the term that I'm hearing a lot right now. I think if you go back when cloud came along, folks initially thought, we'll just manage cloud in the same way that we've managed all other IT for the last, however many decades. And I think as cloud hit scale, as you saw, right, of course, that quickly became pretty clear that it wasn't going to work in, legacy like ITFM processes and things like that. And so obviously then FinOps sprung up to manage that high variability, growth, granularity, distributed accountability of infrastructure as a service. To clarify, as we're talking about cloud right now. And then the convergence we've seen in the last, I would say really the last 18 months, but especially accelerating this year, was this idea that the organizations with mature FinOps practices are looking at their success in managing predictability, optimization, unit economics, all these things within cloud, and saying, hey, that's great. Can you also do that with blank? Can you do it with our SaaS? Can you do it with our data center? Can you do it over here with software? And then the conversations quickly come to, as germane to this, like, hey, we've got an ITAM team, right? And they're really good at managing licenses, but there's complications, as you know, with licenses and cloud and application of those. So how do we get those two working together? And what do we do over time to combine, merge, facilitate that conversation between them?
Any idea why we would see it the same way? Any idea why just over the last 12 to 18 months, this became something where we're seeing momentum versus earlier?
I think it's just a maturity of not only the FinOps practices, but feels like cloud as a thing that we've all been talking about I started getting into cloud in like 2009. Like it feels like we've hit, not peak cloud, but we've hit a place where cloud dominance is there, right? Cloud is generally mature in a lot of organizations. The spending for Fortune 500s may be into, billions of dollars a year on cloud. And it's big enough, I think, for the processes and principles that they've been applying through FinOps to cloud to no longer be just applied there and to integrate more at the board level concern, right? So it was literally probably just at last year, the 2023 FinOps X conference in San Diego, that we saw the first, we're actually doing this stories. And then, in the last year, it's been, we've got a conference coming up in Barcelona in a couple of weeks. I would say 30-40% of the speakers there are doing that expansion. And we just did an informal survey. We saw 60 to 70% of the FinOps practices are now looking at SaaS, whether they're doing it on their own or with the ITAM team, or they're coordinating with another group. It's now part of what they're being asked to consider.
Yeah, and when you say SaaS, a variant of software, again, we could probably go down for a couple hours to talk about software and what that means. When you say SaaS, should we think Salesforce, Workday, ServiceNow, O365, or should we think more Snowflake, Databricks, MongoDB, and those SaaS applications predominantly bought or more and more bought through the marketplaces that are closer to cloud, or are you seeing them both?
I guess two answers, yes, and it depends. I think there's definitely a bifurcation of different types of SaaS we're seeing, right? So there's the traditional HR software, SAP, Workday, all that stuff that is more likely to have, or Oracle or licensing attached in the past. And then there's, the thing that is absolutely now a part of most FinOps practices is the more cloud-like SaaS, the Databricks, the Snowflakes, all of those types of things. Now, I would say I got caught off guard last week. One of the keynote speakers at the upcoming conference were sharing their story, and they mentioned SaaS as a government agency in Europe. We mentioned SaaS to them, and they were like, "Yeah, we've taken that on. We've got a SAM team and a FinOps team working side by side, under the same leader. And I was like, well, what's the SaaS that's your biggest pain point? And I was expecting to hear one of those ones you just mentioned. And they actually threw out Adobe Creative Cloud. And I was like,
Oh,
oh,
for sure.
geez.
Yeah. We've seen
Yeah.
that for you. Yep.
Okay. Yeah. So that's new in FinOps land, right? Because it's not been thought of as something that's tied to that for a lot of the big practices.
Yeah, it's I would say over the last 6 months, I've started to engage with a lot of our customers, and I think if you talk about FinOps as an alliance with ITAM,
Mhm.
what we would see is when ITAM people are involved with SaaS, you hear things like SaaS sprawl, shadow SaaS. You
Mhm.
hear more Microsoft O365, Adobe,
Yep.
and things like that.
Yep.
When I go out and talk to our cloud cost optimization customers, that's where I hear more MongoDB, Snowflake, Databricks, and the
Exactly.
like. So I think my view has changed evolved over the years. So while I was out thinking that there was a convergence or an alliance between ITAM and FinOps that was necessary,
Mhm.
the SaaS management market is another discrete
Mhm.
market. Gartner tracks it, puts out a Magic Quadrant now. And in some senses, I think there's a holy trinity of
Mhm.
spend that, has FinOps converging with some element of the SaaS management market, FinOps converging with ITAM, and
Mhm.
ITAM converging with SaaS. Interested in your thoughts on that.
Yeah. I think what is really interesting and exciting for me about where all this sits right now is it reminds me of 2017. And 2017 for me was like noticing that everybody was talking about this idea of how to manage cloud, but they were all describing it slightly different ways. And like the FinOps term and concept wasn't quite there. And we're seeing the same thing with this from our end. And obviously I'm coming from the FinOps side, like cloud plus one, cloud plus SaaS, cloud plus private cloud, plus whatever. And everybody's talking about it and they're trying to describe it, but it's all slightly different. And so
Yeah.
the question of where it sits and managed is depending on the maturity of not just their FinOps or ITAM practice, but which started first. And then the question becomes, okay, we're seeing, and we saw, 2 years ago in the FinOps framework, we brought in ITAM as an intersecting discipline. We had SaaS and licensing as a capability. What happens in a new practice? Let's say a more cloud native company who's started with cloud and they need to add SaaS or licensing. Do they set up an ITAM practice? Does it just become a part of the FinOps practice?
Yeah.
Because in a legacy one, they're going to have the two work together, and then it's a
That's right.
question of where that goes. So it's really it depends, which is where I kind of started this conversation.
So you're now on my talk track, which is, and I am I have a very clear opinion on this, and that is, this isn't a technology problem in any way, shape, or form.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
There's three discrete markets. We've been doing, the market's been doing ITAM for many years, and you're dating back to 2009. I think you said on FinOps, SaaS management has been around for many, many years. The thing that we can't control with technology is an organizational structure.
Yeah.
And we've been doing a lot of work at Flexera to try and see if there's any commonality among organizations. And
Mm-hmm.
since we've got, well over 5,000 ITAM and FinOps and SaaS management customers. And the answer is a resounding no. We have some ITAM practices that are part of security and really have no desire or remit to work with the FinOps team. Sometimes the FinOps team or the Cloud Center of Excellence is coming over the top and taking over ITAM. Times we see the exact opposite, where ITAM is taking over FinOps.
Mm-hmm.
And I've come to the conclusion that there's never going to be a common organizational structure. So the C word that I'm using of late isn't so much convergence, because it tends to get a visceral reaction from some people. They think that their job is going to be altered, and it's really collaboration is the C word.
Yeah.
I think what we need to do with technology and data in particular is surface the data so that regardless of where you sit in the organization, you're able to collaborate and take a look at everything.
You're hitting the nail on the head, I think. So if you think of all these disciplines, from the ITAM to SAM to ITFM to TB, whatever flavor of thing, they all, if you read what they're trying to do, it's all the same thing, which is like value from technology. But I think where FinOps has tried to focus from the beginning is that, but then the key thing is collaboration between disparate teams that aren't used to working well together. Finance, technology, business, product. And now we're seeing, we just had a summit this morning, the shift left not just in the development cycle of FinOps, but into the product design cycle. So
Yep.
at the business level, let's talk about cost estimations, landing patterns, all these things before we even figure out what we're going to build or where we're going to build it. And so that collaboration aspect, you're 100% right, is what is, I think, accelerated right now. It's always FinOps working with ITFM or with ITAM or whichever SAM or whichever group it is. And historically, they've been more siloed. But now it's not like product design thrown over the fence to build it, thrown over the fence to operate it. Now that whole stream is coming together.
Yep. Yeah, we're encouraging our customers to do is anytime. And I think most of these enterprise companies, or really any size company, with a variety of different teams and organizations, they get very parochial or protective of their tool or solution. And we are the system of record. So there's a lot of pride and ownership around system of record.
Yep.
And I've also come to the conclusion that it's, nobody shouldn't need to touch your systems of record. Keep all of your system record in place, but pull it all back to a common data model and create a system of insight where nobody's stepping on one another's toes. Nobody's trying to create the single pane of glass that, everybody's been seeking for 20 plus years. And let's just surface data that's applicable to a variety of different functional areas.
Yeah, I mean, the organizational thing you were talking about a few minutes ago, I think is really interesting because I'm reminded of the first few years when we were out there doing FinOps work, which was, there was always a question of where does FinOps sit in the organization? Right. Is it CIO, CFO, CTO? And it was really unclear in the beginning. And over the last few years, and we surveyed this data, we have a new state of FinOps coming out, it's gone heavily toward like a CTO org, or a CIO, depending on the structure, but it's gone away from the finance team. It's gone away from, an operations. It's become in that area. And so I think that's kind of what we're likely going to start seeing in the coming years with this, is hopefully a normalization of where that sits, because it is all over based on the politics and the legacy and all those things right now.
Yeah, and to use the construct, agreed, and to use the construct from your framework, right? There's a crawl, walk, runner, a maturity that organizations have, and sure you see it all, right? There's some that are just on their journey. Heck, even in some of the regulated industries, one could argue they're just on their cloud journey. And then there's other born in the cloud that are looking to expand out. And we're just trying to meet the customers where they are. But yeah, I think there is some normalization. But man, there's a lot of diversity out there as well.
Yeah. And I think that meeting them where they are hits two things. Because I historically, I worked on the vendor tooling side, and there's obviously a lot of power in being able to provide tooling and whatnot to companies. But to your point, this is not really a technology problem. It's really a culture and ways of working problem. And we're hearing people say things, I want to apply like the FinOps way of working to this other area. The other area is it's a data problem, right? It's you need to get the data in the, FinOps world, we talk about getting data in the path of the engineer or data in the path of the business owner. It's like, how do you get that set of normalized, enriched, total cost of ownership, heading toward unit economics so that we can make better decisions about what to spend, not necessarily spend less or optimize. Optimize could be do a big investment, right, as part of that. So I think getting that out there is key as well.
Yeah, we believe data is the foundational element here. At the end of the day, it's a data play. The abstraction layer of the user interface is interesting if you're in the business of selling an offering, but the underlying data is what you've ultimately got to bring together and surface it up as a single umbrella.
So how are you, so if I could turn it around a little bit, when you're seeing those teams come together where they've got a set of these, are you seeing any trends in how there's, meaning an ITAM team and a SAM team and a FinOps team? Are you seeing any trends of how they merge or converge or collaborate?
We are. Again, I think that an organizational structure is we can't alter that. And even when we have one, when you're working, especially with the Global 2000, chances are they're going to have another reorg every January anyway. So what we've done is, we're having let's just say, I don't know if it's a PhD level discussion right now about convergence or collaboration. I think you and I would argue that some of our views are ahead of where the market is, in actuality on implementing it. So what we're doing is we're going to our customers, and really the common thread, and I think where everybody can get their head around is there is software that is running in a cloud environment, and software is either purchased and acquired through a marketplace, in which case it shows up on your invoice, or you may be buying it on a pay-as-you-go basis.
Mm-hmm.
You know, for example, somebody may go in on a pay-as-you-go for SQL Server. And FinOps teams can get their head around that. They see these transactions taking place. But when we go to the FinOps team and says, well, do you know about your licenses that you're sitting on with your Microsoft E5 or whatever agreement you signed? And did you know this thing called hybrid use run,
Yeah.
or that you retire a license, and instead of using a pay-as-you-go, which is much more expensive, you can leverage this license in your ITAM environment. They get that. That's not curing. That's not solving the whole problem. It's not converging the whole thing, but they tend to get it, and that forces a conversation, a non-threatening conversation with the ITAM team, and pokes maybe just a little hole in the wall where we can focus on software in the cloud, which is actually a big visibility gap for most companies. We were dealing with one of the larger customers that we deal with, and we went to the ITAM leader and we said, hey, who owns software? And he said, I own software. Okay, well, what about SQL and Oracle DB running in your cloud? Oh, that's the cloud people. So we went over to the cloud person, and we said, what about software in the cloud? She said, well, no, that's the ITAM team. And when we worked with them, we identified tens of millions of dollars in wasted spend because both were not totally looking at the entire problem.
Yep. Yeah, and I think looking at the entire problem is exactly the crux of what we all need to figure out in the coming years, because however that convergence or collaboration happens, I'm going to say that every time, convergence collaboration, there is then, for those looking ahead on this and all the conversations I'm having, is where is the line? Right. So if FinOps is covering public cloud and it's starting to intersect with ITAM and licensing, and SaaS is coming in there, and we're hearing in our last informal survey and summits, we saw upwards of 55 to 65% of FinOps teams were touching licensing, and about 45% of them were being asked to touch data centers. The invariable question then becomes, well, what about the associated costs? And I was just talking with a friend who runs data centers in a colo environment, and he was talking about some of the new GPUs that are coming out, and that they use literally for the same physical space 15 times the power. And I was like, oh, so it's a power issue. He's like, no, it's not a power issue. It's a cooling issue, because we actually have to spread out the racks in our data center, which changes the unit economics of the hardware, not because the hardware is more expensive, because I can't fit as many physically in the room. And then suddenly we've got to factor all that into the cost of this, and then you're layering on and stacking on it. I'm not going to say the other word that makes people cringe in this is, what about labor costs in relation to, these more operational expense, software, cloud. So all of these are being approached at different angles, but ultimately, we're seeing the most mature practices. And we've got one speaking at the conference in a couple of weeks, that they're stacking all these things together, the labor, the private cloud, the public cloud, the licensing, into a single consolidated product focused view, like customer facing product view, aligning revenue against that, and not doing it like on a monthly or quarterly basis, like a legacy ITFM approach, but doing it like a daily updating decision-making view for like FinOps teams to work in, right? So question is that where everybody goes, or is that going to be the outlier of the super mature practice?
I believe everybody. I think the vast majority of people end up there, because I think there's an expression, I don't know who it's from, but things refuse to be mismanaged for long. And I think, I look at the category of business spend management. Think a Rebop, Coupa, Zip is now in there. And people have been investing in strategic procurement systems for many years, because they've realized that's a strategic capability any organization needs. But the reality is the way you manage buying paper and pencils is wholly insufficient for buying technology. And the way I would see it is, it starts to come together as, whether it's a subcategory of business spend management or a tangential market, technology spend. And I would say technology spend and risk, because I think the other side of the spend coin is risk.
Oh, yeah.
Technology spend and risk management as a discipline and a category to manage what is undoubtedly, the fastest growing line item for most CEOs, which is spend in tech. Because as the cliche says, every company is a technology company now. And I think it inevitably has to go there.
Yeah, it's making me think a lot about this aspect where at the end of the day, I said every company every company is a technology company, but the other group we're seeing come in a lot is the strategic sourcing, the procurement people who
Oh,
historically have been like kind of off to the edge. I think we had like 1% of the FinOps community that was there, and now because you look at the complexity of negotiating a deal with a major hyperscaler and the level of detail there, they're an integrated part. We're seeing even FinOps practice have their own integrated strategic sourcing teams, or sometimes we're seeing FinOps live
really?
in a technology procurement organization in some organizations, right?
So
And so,
here's an interesting, that's fascinating to me because I've been here 26 years. I've seen a lot, but I can tell you that by far, when our customers excel at driving value in their investment with Flexera for IT asset management, the common denominator that tells me that they are going to have a successful implementation is sourcing or procurement is always involved. Always. It's an essential ingredient because they're sitting on the master software agreements that number in thousands oftentimes, and they have to do that. And it's interesting to me that now we're seeing them join the party from the FinOps perspective.
and if you think about the evolution of the FinOps framework as we've seen, and what we try and do each year is update it based on not where we think things are going, but what we're actively seeing in the majority of practices. A couple of years ago, we brought in the allied personas, which were like allied personas for ITAM, allied personas for procurement, allied for security. We're just seeing those some of those move more into like core persona sort of world, right? Where it's not the FinOps team is going off and talking occasionally to the strategic sourcing or the license management people. Like they're in, constant communication, collaboration with them. And because we're seeing that aspect of the scope of FinOps is expanding beyond public cloud, suddenly they're all over that. And, I think you and I have talked before as well about like enterprise architects, right? Like that's not a distinct persona right now in the FinOps framework. We see it under the engineering category. In fact, like that's a setup that's in there, but, they're another piece that's coming in. So I think we're just seeing an acceleration of the conversations with those groups, and where it used to be, let's go talk to our sourcing vendor management people when we're negotiating that big deal. It's like they're making regular, constant commitments, micro commitments to their providers, and they've got to be completely aligned with those folks all the time.
Yeah, and that's where we see the impact of marketplace kicking in. I think that's where sourcing and procurement has really started to lean in because we're seeing 25 to 30% of some organizations' cloud bills are coming through the marketplace. And what we're seeing is that some of those acquisitions via the marketplace are for software where companies already have a pre-negotiated enterprise license agreement. So there's waste in the system. And again, the common denominator that's driving the need for collaboration is software. That's the common denominator. And marketplace has been a real eye-opener for a lot of procurement professionals who, quite frankly, 5 years ago didn't even know what a marketplace was or that it existed.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's been a nice accelerant to get more things being purchased in a cloud-like way, right? And under those existing MSAs. To jump back a little bit to the GPU thing and everybody's favorite topic right now, AI. That's another interesting area which we're seeing a lot of how to manage the cost of AI, the FinOps for AI aspect. And if, it seems completely different, but if you get down to it, there's a set of usage optimizations, rate optimizations, but there's a lot more cardinality in that area. Because if you think about, if I go optimize a prompt for a certain LLM, that optimization may not apply in another one or in another black box model somewhere else, right? And then you've got different ways you're paying for it and tokens and things, which kind of map to rate optimizations in FinOps land. Totally different set of terminology and way different options, but then you might be running in cloud, or you might have GPUs in your data center, or you might be using SaaS. And so we're looking at how does that all come together. And there's an enterprise member in the foundation. It's a large FinServe, and they've got a head of AI spend management that goes across all of their different ways they spend AI, right? So these are different scoping grouping of types of spend that are going to have new teams, and ultimately will roll into one, but they're still specialized.
It's going to be a tsunami wave. There's not a week that goes by on my Google newsfeed that I'm not seeing a multi-billion-dollar investment made by one of the hyperscalers. And I'm from Wisconsin, so Racine, Wisconsin, a couple of weeks ago. Portugal, Brazil. There's just literally tens and hundreds of billions of dollars being spent building these data centers. And every time I see the number, I say, well, let's mark it up by 30, 35%, because that's the margin that all these guys, and somebody's going to be consuming that. And anytime you have that amount of consumption, there's going to be a need to apply the discipline, the principles in the FinOps framework to go and do that. So irrespective of what tooling or solutions you use to track it and manage it and optimize it, you're going to have business process behind it to get control on it.
And that's where I see we all have an opportunity to not reinvent the wheel, right? I mean, there's a set of processes in ITAM that exist, and SAM exists. FinOps has a set of those. Like, AI is an area of spend. I mean, cloud is, call it 600 billion in spend. AI is come up to 200, 300 billion in almost no time. It's going to be as bigger as cloud. You bring in licensing, bring these other areas. There's a trillion and a half dollars a year of cloud-like spending happening, and they all can benefit from the same processes, which is, I think, where we're trying to figure out where those lines are together.
And a lot of enthusiasm to go and do AI and run LLM, which are distributed engineering teams. Just I've got a lot of engineers at Flexera as well that they're racing to do this, but it's quite expensive, as you know.
It's like cloud 10 years ago. Like, go use the cool thing, and let's make sure we get the most value. But then I think there's going to be a reckoning coming on, are you getting value out of that spend? We're not sure.
We see it the exact same way.
Well, it's really great talking to you, Jim.
I think we're
over on time.
15. We'll talk to the editors, and maybe there's the like the 60 minutes version where you can see the extended clip of Jim and J.R. go through this. But thank you for your time.
Hey, thank you for inviting me.
And really intellectually stimulating stuff. Thank you.
Likewise. Really appreciate it. Thanks a lot, Jim. Have a good one.
Bye-bye.